Alright, today is day 3 for Unit 3. Our topics are the law of supply and quantity supplied. For your do now, you had a couple review exercises. For the first one, we are looking at hamburger prices rising in price and that creating a change in demand for hamburger buns. And so we show that. We label our axes, price and quantity. We have a demand curve, we label it D1, and then since we're working with two different items there, hamburger buns and hamburger prices, we identify the relationship between the two. We know that they are complements, and so if the change in the price of one is going to affect the demand for the other one. So if prices go up, that means demand is going to go down for both of them, and so we show demand decrease, a shift to the left because of change in the price of our complements. For number 2, we start off in a similar way, label our axes, price and quantity. We have our demand curve, and then the scenario says XYZ Telecom offers reduced rates. Hey, that sounds like a decrease in price. Does this create a change in demand or change in quantity demand? And since we're only working with one item here, which is XYZ Telecom, right, then there is a price reduction, so that means that we are going to have a change in quantity demand, and so we'll have P1 and we'll have quantity 1, and a price reduction we get P2, which is lower than P1, and we have Q2, quantity 2, and we're going to have movement down the curve, which is going to be a change in quantity demanded. It's a quantity demand increase, and the reason is because of a change in price. So there you go. There's 2 exercises for review, and we had one more for review. This is your ticket out from last class, and I'll run over that one for you real quick. You can pause the video and do this yourself and check and see if you are correct. So we're going to draw our axes, price and quantity, and we label our demand curve D1. So multiple crashes, even some deaths, were linked to Takata brand airbags. Graph and explain what happens to the market for Takata brand airbags. All right. So obviously people are not going to want these anymore, and so that's going to create a demand decrease, shift to the left. The reason is because of a change in tastes and preferences. Tough to write here. We'll just say it. Taste and preferences is the reason. All right, moving forward. Our big question for today, what is the relationship between price and supply? We're done talking about demand. We're going to do scenarios that deal with supply. And so basically we're going to swap out the word demand for supply. So we're going to graph and analyze the law of supply. We're going to create market and individual supply schedules. And then we're going to see how price creates changes in quantity supplied. This ties in with the second content standard, and you'll notice some similar terminology. We have 5 new key terms for today, and again, notice the similarity to the demand key terms. Our next key terms quiz will be on Thursday, March 22nd. This is key terms quiz number 6, and you will have all of these terms plus the terms that you'll learn next class, 8 total new terms. So you can refer back to Chapter 5, Section 4 with an overview of supply. And I'm going to give you a few notes and set you up with how to think about supply. Because we're familiar with demand, and so we need to have the right mindset when we're thinking about supply. It'll make things a lot easier for us. So to get us started in that direction, why would a company produce more of a product to sell? Well, the answer we can find if we look at our chart that we had created last unit for types of economic systems. I've highlighted here in yellow how to produce for a market economy, and it's you produce in a way in which you're going to gain profits. You need to make money, and so individuals and businesses are going to make decisions which will allow them to make money. If you don't make money, you don't have a business. You can't pay your employees, you can't pay for your equipment, you can't pay for your utilities, and you can't even pay your own salary. So it's important that all businesses make a profit. And so all of your decisions lead to making a profit. So what are you going to make? How are you going to make it? Who's going to get it? It all comes down to what is going to give you profit so that you can stay in business. And when we talk about supply and demand, we're talking about producers and consumers. And we have to look at economics from the same side. And so we might look at one scenario and say, hey, that's a 9. But if we look at it from another perspective, we might say, oh, hey, that's a 6. And both can be correct depending on the perspective that you are looking. And I say this because anytime that there is an interaction between buyers and sellers in a marketplace, both sides see that situation differently. The people buying the car are going to say, hey, we want a low price. We are consumers. We want to buy, but we don't want to spend a lot of money. Whereas the people on the other side selling the car are saying, hey, I want to make a profit. Right? I'm not worried about a low price buying the car. I'm worried about making enough money to cover all of my costs so that I can get paid so that my company can survive. And so there's two different perspectives for each of these transactions. And we're familiar with being consumers. So it's easy to understand demand and the law of demand and demand shifts. What is more challenging is to understand the law of supply and to look at all of these situations through the perspective of a producer. So whether you're a car manufacturer, an auto salesman, you are dealing with supply as a producer. And so let's start to think, what does a producer want? A producer wants to make a profit. So all decisions are going to lead to making a profit. So we did this activity, Table 1. This is a handout. You can find it under Schoology, in which we think about at these various price points, what is the quantity I would be willing to sell? And if we think about profit, we would see that, hey, I'm not going to make very much money at a low price, so I'm not going to sell very many. But if the price goes up, I would love to sell a lot more because I'm going to make a lot more profit. Now, I know that you might be saying, nobody's going to buy a Monster Energy drink for $5.50. Well, that may be true. And we'll talk about what happens with the intersection of demand and supply next week or after spring break. For right now, just understand that as the price goes up, we would want to sell more because we would make more money. And so we can get our first set of key terms. You can pause the video and copy these down. You can also refer to your text for these key terms, supply and quantity supply. And again, notice the similarity to demand, except that we're looking from the perspective of a producer instead of a consumer. Then we shifted to activity Table 2, in which we did something similar to what we did before with the market demand schedule, is we created a market supply schedule. And we take if each student is an individual producer, we add up all of the producers and we get a market supply. And the terminology for this would be a supply schedule. Just like a demand schedule, we can have individual and market supply schedules. Simply a table that shows quantity supplied at different prices by individuals or producers. So that's our third key term. And we describe what is happening here with the law of supply, and this is our fourth key term. So basically, producers are willing to produce more of a good or service as the price becomes higher. And you should always be able to identify the reason behind this. And that reason is because of the profit motive. We're going to make more money means that we can cover our costs as the price rises. And actually, you have increasing opportunity costs when you increase your production, and so therefore it's necessary to sell at a higher price because your costs are also increasing. But for right now, just understand that it's the profit motive that lies behind this. And so we draw this on a graph. There's an example there, as well as here. We have our supply curve. Notice that it is positive. There's a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. Quantity is still on the x-axis. Whether it's demand or supply, it's still on the x-axis. And then price is still on the y-axis. And so then this graphic organizer, you should have copied down, and we'll continue it next class. But for right now, we're going to focus on the left side, looking at price as one of the things that affects supply. And notice our learning objective. I can graph and explain how changing prices creates changes in quantity supplied. You should recognize that this is basically the same as demand, in that price affects both demand and supply. It affects both demand and supply in terms of quantity demanded and quantity supplied. And so let's look at an example of this. Change in quantity supplied this is your last key term. It's the change in price that causes movement along the supply curve. We're not moving that entire curve left or right. We're staying on the curve, and we're simply going up or down on that curve in a response to changes to price. So if price starts at P1, we're at point A on the curve, but if price goes up to P sub 2, we're going to be at point B. That means that we're going to shift up the curve, which would be a quantity supply increase from Q1 to Q2. So you can practice all of these concepts with Supply Practice and Review worksheet number 1. It is on Schoology. I have extra copies if you want to stop by and see me. Otherwise, review with that and study your key terms. There's about 59 key terms that will be required for Thursday. And see me if you have any questions.